Matt Hayes is on with us. He's been with Bleacher Report. He's currently with Saturday Down South. He's been with some other folks. There's Matt. I see him. And he's zooming in from Jacksonville, I think, this morning. Matt, how's it going?
Doing great. Hope my city Orlando is doing well there. I miss Orlando. My had a house right down the road there in College Park too. Love that city. How y'all doing? Good morning.
Well, we're doing great. I checked, and we're holding the tea time on one at Dubs Dread just in case you could make it this morning. But
I hit a lot of bad shots at that course, Sam. A lot.
Well, you've had a lot of great articles. How's that for a segue?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Obviously, you kind of run the gamut with what you've covered over the years. From the, you've always been in the Southeast, but cover the whole country. The big story, obviously, this year, or at least in this room with Carl Schmidt, is Tennessee and how they're playing this year. I'm curious, when you look at the Vols, and then you think of it in the context of what the first CFP rankings might look like this week. Where do you think the Vols will be?
I think if they're anywhere other than first, there's something wrong. I don't know what those people in the committee are seeing. But you have to understand, I was part of the first mock that they did years ago, where they brought people from the media in. They said, look, this is how we're doing it. We want you guys to go over this system and see how it works. And we did the 2008 season, which of course was the controversial one where Texas, Oklahoma, and Texas Tech all ended with one loss. But Oklahoma went because they had the better BCS ranking, even though Texas won by 10. So we did it again. And believe me, even the people that we had, that, the quote unquote media guys who knew what they're talking about, a majority of them still chose Oklahoma over Texas, even though Texas won by 10 in October. It's weird. You got to deal with the human condition when you start talking about the playoff and how people vote. And there was times when I was sitting back thinking to myself, Texas won by 10. And there were people saying, yeah, but I think Oklahoma's a better team. So it's not about as much as you think metrics of who beat who, or who's done this as far as scoring points, who's done this as far as giving up points. It's really comes down to the eye test, who the people in that room think are the best teams. So I wouldn't be surprised with anyone. I think if you're looking at a team like Tennessee that's beaten 5 ranked teams at the time they played, I don't know how you ignore that. But again, who knows what happens in that room.
So I'm curious, when you look at the top 10 in general, you see how overwhelmed it is with SEC teams, and you look at the possibility of, could you end up with more than 2 even in the top 4? I wouldn't imagine so, but there's so much quality football there. How do you see beyond Tennessee the SEC shaking out?
I will say this to you, Sam. The SEC is interesting because you could have as many as 4 one-loss teams. It could happen. Or now it's probably 3 now, since Ole Miss lost last week. It was to LSU, but you could have 3 one-loss teams. You could have LSU win out with 2 losses and get to the playoff. I look at the playoff right now. To me, the 4 best teams right now, I think, again, this is my eye test just by watching them and seeing what they've done and seeing the teams they beat. The 4 best teams right now are probably, if you had to put hey, what are your teams? I'd say Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio State, and Michigan. So does that mean 2 SEC and 2 Big Ten in the playoff? It's possible. I mean, if you've got Ohio State and Michigan unbeaten in that last game of the season on November 26th, and it's a close win by whoever wins, and it's a great game, and then that team ends up winning the Big Ten, and then you've got, let's say, unbeaten Tennessee against 1-loss Alabama, and Alabama wins that game, wins the rematch, another great game, and Clemson doesn't win, they lose somewhere. And I still think Clemson's going to lose somewhere, and I don't think TCU is going to go unbeaten either. You easily could see a situation where the voters just say, look, these are the 4 best teams, and you've got 2 SEC versus 2 Big Ten, which honestly probably should have been the case last year. It probably should have been 2 SEC and 2 Big Ten last year. Ohio State, I think, was a better team than Cincinnati, but I get the whole idea of the group of 5 and the unbeaten, and you got to get them in there. But the 4 best teams last year were from the 2 power conferences.
When you see how group 5 shaken out this year in particular, is that sort of bolster that argument, I guess, in the sense that there isn't some standout, clear, no question group of 5 team that's dominating?
Yeah, you know what, Sam, I thought Cincinnati had a really good year last year. I don't want to take anything away from them. They played really well. They played well against Alabama. They played well the year before against Georgia in the Peach Bowl. So, I mean, I think they deserved it. I just didn't think they were one of the 4 best teams. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what they're trying to do with that playoff. It's not necessarily conference champions. It's not necessarily let's try and get the little guy in. And believe me, I was all for the little guy for years, especially UCF and the run they had a couple years with Scott Frost and with Josh Heupel. So I was all for them. But at the end of the day, you're trying to get the 4 best teams in the playoff because you want the best playoff.
You also I know it feels like we've stuck a lot in the SEC here this morning, but University of Georgia lost a legend over the weekend with Vince Dooley passing away, and he was also made a couple appearances down here in the Tangerine Bowl and Citrus Bowl. 84 was one of the only ties in game history with Dooley against Bobby Bowden, Florida State. I know you've written quite a bit about Vince over the years. I'm curious what's your lasting memory of Vince Dooley as a coach, as a person? How might you tribute him?
Well, just a wonderful man first, really. I mean, you can talk all you want about him being a great coach, and he was. 6 SEC titles, a national championship, 201 career victories, but just a wonderful man. One of the best anecdotes, I guess, I could tell you guys is long ago when I was working in Jacksonville, the first time I was here at the newspaper, I was covering the Gators. That was my beat at the Times Union, and we did a special section every year for the Florida Georgia game. So I sat down with Vince and spoke with him about his career, and he took me back to this 1987 game against Vanderbilt. They're on the road, they're losing 21-7. He starts having pains in his chest, and he's walking down the sidelines. He knows he's at the end of his career. He knows there are people at that school that want to change. He's trying to hold on. He's walking down the sidelines trying to scream at his players, get them motivated, get them going. I mean, it's Vanderbilt, and they're down 21-7. And he told me, well, this would be a nice way for me to go, have a heart attack on the sidelines, and I'm losing to Vanderbilt. So he has the heart attack, and he keeps coaching. He doesn't leave. They don't push him out on a stretcher and take him to the local hospital. He stays on the field, coaches the game. They outscore him 45-3 the rest of the way. They win big. He goes to his doctor on Monday, not Sunday, Monday. Goes to his doctor. His doctor says you need angioplasty. He has a surgery on Wednesday. 3 days later, on Saturday, he's back at the stadium coaching the team. They have a come from behind victory against Kentucky. Just a crazy, crazy story of a guy that loved it, loved football, loved his family. Just a great man. Vince was a great, great man.
That's a great anecdote. I appreciate you sharing that. Before I let you go, I want to hit a couple more quick things with you. Obviously, the Big 12's media rights deal was big news yesterday, and especially around here with UCF and the influence there, and them going to the conference. What is it? What's kind of the big picture significance of the Big 12 and their deal with Fox and ESPN, and can you paint some color around that for us?
Well, I think as much as anything, Sam, you're talking about now 12 teams that beginning in 2025 will probably earn somewhere around $40 million a year. And that's huge because that's probably what they're making right now. Maybe they're probably making a little more right now with Texas and Oklahoma, but there were a lot of folks who believe once Texas and Oklahoma left the Big 12, that the value would be decreased by 50% at least. Now, it certainly has been decreased because with Texas and Oklahoma, my guess would be they'd be somewhere near the mid 50s to 60 per team. But still, to earn $40 million in a world right now where they're probably going to be making as much or more than the ACC, whose media rights deal doesn't end until 2036, they'll be making considerably more than the Pac-12, which still hasn't figured out their new deal. They're still far behind the SEC and the Big Ten. And those teams are probably going to make around $75 million. But if you're UCF and you go from, what were they making in the American? $5-7 million a year, $10 million a year tops to $40 million. That's going to completely change the way you do things, not only with football, but your entire athletic department. So it's just such a big boost for programs that for so long never had that cash influx. And it's exciting. I mean, if I'm a fan of UCF right now, and I love that campus, I love what they're doing there. I love sports wise what they've done. Every sport too, not just football. You should be very, very excited by the fact that now you have a revenue stream that's going to help all sports, not just football.
I guess we might as well round out the Florida schools while we've got you. Maybe the foremost expert on football in this state with all the teams you've covered here. You mentioned the Gators in your time having covered them up close, and Florida State obviously is having a bit of a rebound this year and seems to be playing better. When you look ahead to Florida State this year, what are your thoughts on that matchup and those two teams?
I think it's a big game for Mike Norvell, a big, big game, because you've got Florida State will be the favorite. I think the prevailing wisdom is that Florida State is the better team. They're, like you said, they've kind of rebounded a little bit. They've come out of the hinterlands of nowhereness, and they're starting to play better. They're 5-3. They've got a chance to be 8-3 going into that game. If they're 8-3 going into that game, they have to win that game because Florida right now is struggling. Florida's going to struggle this weekend at Texas A&M. Florida's going to struggle at home against South Carolina. Florida might struggle against Vandy on the road. So if you're Florida State, you've got to win that game. You've got to win that game, not only just because you haven't beat them in a while, but because you've got to show recruits that, yes, we're not going anywhere. And as, of course, as you guys all know, this is all about the recruiting game and procuring players and developing players. And right now, Florida State needs more players, like Florida and like Miami, actually.
Absolutely. And if Florida State's 8-3 and wins that game, I bet I have a feeling I know where they might end up after that. And for more on that, we're going to have Matt Repchak come up. But first, we're going to say bye to Matt Hayes. Matt, number one, take off. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you hopping on this morning.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you again. And we'll look forward to your coverage throughout the season.